I don't remember exactly when she stopped loving me, but I remember the exact moment I realized it. It was a Thursday. Nothing special about it, just another late evening. I had picked up some takeout, the kind she liked. She used to love when I'd bring it home unannounced. She used to smile like a kid opening a gift. This time, she barely looked up from her phone. I thought maybe she had a rough day at work. I asked, she said it's fine, and went back to scrolling. We sat in silence. She used to talk to me about everything. Her work, her sister's drama, her weird dreams, even the color of her nails.
Bro, now.
Silence was her favorite language, and I was drowning in it. I noticed the signs way before that night. The late meetings, the forced laughs, the phone she kept face down. I told myself not to assume. I told myself to trust her. After all, she was my wife, the woman I had chosen to grow old with, the one I held when her father passed, the one I danced with in our kitchen at 1 a.m., barefoot and completely in love. But love doesn't vanish overnight. It fades quietly, like a room that loses its light without anyone noticing. That night, I walked past her into the bedroom, trying to shake off the feeling, and that's when I saw it. Her second phone. The one she swore she only used for work. It was unlocked, the screen still lit, and what I read was enough to hollow me out from the inside. I miss you already. I wish I was in your arms tonight. My heart didn't pound. It didn't rage. It just stopped. There were more messages, photos, a name I didn't recognize. The timeline didn't start recently. It went back months. Conversations that were clearly intimate, deep, tender, not just physical. I stood there, frozen. My chest felt like it had caved in, not from anger, but from something worse, grief. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream. I didn't demand answers. Walked back into the living room. She was still on the couch, still glued to her phone, still indifferent to my presence. I told her I needed some air. She didn't even ask where I was going. I walked out with nothing but my wallet, my keys, and a heart that no longer knew its own home. I didn't slam the door. And for the longest time, I made sure she couldn't find me. I didn't plan to disappear that night. There was no suitcase in the trunk, no hotel booked, no farewell letter. Just a quiet ride with the windows down and a kind of stillness that felt louder than any argument we could have had. The roads looked different, even though I'd driven them 100 times before. Streetlights blurred like they were crying with me. I didn't even notice I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. I don't remember checking into the motel. I remember the name of the town. All I remember is sitting on a bed that didn't belong to me, staring at a ceiling that didn't care, in a room that didn't ask questions. For the first time in years, I wasn't someone's husband. I wasn't her husband. I had that realization hit harder than anything I read on her phone. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many questions I wanted to ask. Why him? When did it start? Did you ever love me at all? Instead of answers, all I had was the echo of our last conversation, which was nothing. Silence. That was her last word to me. And somehow, that hurt worse than betrayal. The next morning, I turned off my phone. Not out of anger, out of self-preservation. I knew she'd notice I was gone eventually. Maybe she'd call, maybe not. But I wasn't ready to hear whatever explanation she had prepared. I didn't want to hear lies dressed in soft voices. I stayed in that town for 4 days. I walked unfamiliar sidewalks, ate alone, sat in parks watching other couples laugh. I thought it might hurt to see that, but strangely, it didn't. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't bitter. I just felt detached, like I was watching life happen from the outside. That's when I realized something. I had wrapped my identity so tightly around her that without her, I didn't recognize myself anymore. That's not love. That's dependency. And she had known it. She had taken comfort in knowing I'd always be there. I did till I wasn't. On the 5th day, I rented a car under a different name. Drove across state lines and rented a small furnished place. In a coastal town with weathered buildings and air that smelled like salt and freedom. No social media, no mutual friends, no contact. It wasn't a dramatic escape. It was a quiet vanishing, the kind that only matters to the one doing it. The strangest part, I didn't feel lost. I felt found. But she She wasn't done with me yet. The place I settled into wasn't much. An old one-bedroom above a closed-down bakery that still smelled faintly of cinnamon if the breeze hit just right. There was a leaky faucet in the kitchen, a stained chair on the porch, and a neighbor downstairs who listened to jazz every night like it was medicine, but it became mine. I got a job at a small marina, not glamorous, not loud, but honest. I learned how to tie knots and read the water. I fixed broken things that belonged to strangers. There was a rhythm to it, one that didn't ask me about my past, one that didn't require me to explain why I sometimes drifted into silence for no reason. At night, I'd sit on the dock long after. The sun dipped behind the water, letting the world be still around me. I stopped thinking about her every 5 minutes, and it became every 5 hours and days. I didn't try to understand her anymore, and that was the shift. For months, I had turned over every memory in my mind, like a detective looking for missed clues. The birthday she spent out of town, the new perfume that her friend suggested, the night she came home late smelling like wine and not saying why. I'd cataloged all of it, looking for the moment she decided I was no longer enough. But eventually I stopped asking those questions because none of those answers would have changed the one thing that mattered most. I had given her all of me, and she chose someone else. That wasn't something I could fix. I started talking to people again, not about my past, but about the present. A fisherman named Russ, who always brought me coffee without asking. A bookstore owner named Leah, who didn't smile often, but when she did, it felt like the sun came out just for her. Life was small, but it was full of quiet, sincere moments. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything to collapse. But then it happened. One afternoon, I walked into the post office to pick up a package. The woman behind the counter asked for ID. I handed it over. Without thinking, she glanced down, then up, then back down again. "You're not easy to find," she said quietly, sliding me an envelope along with the box. It was thick, handwritten, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. I stood there holding it like it was made of fire. The world around me didn't change, but inside, something twisted. She had found me. I didn't open it right away. I didn't run either. I just walked out, envelope pressed against my chest like it could burn a hole in my ribs. I sat in my truck for an hour, staring at the waves. I thought I had buried that life. I thought silence had made me invisible. But some ghosts don't need doors. They walk straight through the quiet and remind you of who you used to be. And as I stared at that envelope, I had no idea if I was ready to open it. Because part of me still remembered how it felt to lose everything without a single scream. Another part wondered if I was about to lose the peace I had built all over again. Sat with the envelope for 2 full days before I opened it. I didn't hide from it. I just placed it on the kitchen counter and let it sit there like an unwanted guest. Every time I passed by, I'd glance at it, as if the paper might breathe or shift or whisper something to me. It never did, but my hands still trembled when I finally sliced it open. It wasn't a long letter, just 2 pages. Her handwriting was still the same, neat and slightly tilted, like she always wrote in a hurry to get thoughts out before she changed her mind. She didn't start with, "I'm sorry." That would have been too easy. Instead, she started with, "I didn't know where you went. I searched for months. You left without a trace. You left me with silence." It wasn't blame exactly, but it wasn't remorse either. It read like someone who had finally been forced to sit with themselves and found the silence unbearable. She said she hadn't planned any of it. The other man, the lies, the double life. She wrote that it started as a distraction during a time when she felt lost, and she hated herself for how far it went before she realized what she'd done. She said she never thought I'd really leave. She thought I'd confront her, yell, demand an explanation, anything but vanish. Left like someone who had finally accepted they didn't matter anymore. She was right. That's exactly what it felt like. She told me she still wore her ring, that she kept thinking I'd call even once, that she had dreams where I walked through the door with that tired smile I always wore after a long day, that she missed that smile more than anything. But here's what she never said. She never said she regretted choosing him. She never said she wanted to rebuild what we had. She never said she loved me now. Instead, she asked for one thing, to meet just once. Not to explain, just to talk. Want to wave to. Phone number I didn't recognize. No pressure, no demands. Just a question. Would you let me see you, even if only to say goodbye properly? I didn't cry when I read it. I just folded the pages, tucked them back in the envelope, and stared out the window as the sky turned soft with dusk. The kind of blue that comes before streetlights hum to life and the world starts whispering. She had spoken finally, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't the same man she left behind. The man who would have rushed back just to hear her say his name again. The man who would have clung to a shred of hope like it could undo what had already been done. I wasn't sure if I wanted closure. I wasn't sure if I needed it. But curiosity, it's a quiet voice. It doesn't shout. It leans in and asks questions that feel like soft hands pressing against old bruises. And as the night deepened around me, I found myself dialing that number. I didn't even know what I would say. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. All I knew was the past had found me, and now it wanted a response. I had the number in my phone for 2 nights before I dialed it. I didn't save it. I didn't look at it. I just knew it was there, sitting silently in the background of everything I was doing. I'd be pouring coffee, fixing a motor, or walking down the marina steps, and there it was. Not a ringtone, not a message, but a presence. When I finally called, I didn't rehearse what I'd say. I didn't know if I wanted to talk at all. I just sat on the edge of the dock as the tide crept in, and I hit the green button. She answered on the second ring. There was silence at first, long, uncomfortable, and then, hello? It was her voice, but not the version I remembered. It sounded tired, lower, like it hadn't been used much lately, like she'd been speaking through walls for months and had just now come into the open air. It's me, I finally said, and even as I said it, I wasn't sure who me was anymore. She exhaled like she had been holding her breath for weeks. Then she whispered, I didn't think you'd call. Neither did I. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was 2 people walking barefoot over glass, trying not to bleed. We talked like strangers who remembered being lovers in another life but were afraid to say it out loud. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. She asked where I'd been. I said, away. She asked if I hated her. I didn't answer. Then she asked the one thing I wasn't expecting. Can I see you? No begging, no drama, just a quiet request. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. We agreed on neutral ground, a quiet coffee shop halfway between the life I left and the ruins of hers. I drove with 1,000 thoughts pacing circles in my head. What would I say? What would I feel? Would seeing her reopen everything I spent months burying? But when I walked in and saw her sitting at that table, everything went silent. She looked older, not in years, in weight, like she'd been carrying something heavier than guilt. She wore no makeup. Her eyes were swollen like she hadn't slept. But she stood when she saw me, and for the first time since all of it, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Not the kind you fake to avoid consequences. The kind that comes when you realize the person you hurt the most might no longer need you. We sat. No handshakes, no hugs. She tried to smile, but it broke halfway through. You look different, she said. I am, I replied. She nodded like she expected that, and she said something that caught me off guard. I didn't come here to ask for anything. Not forgiveness. Not a second chance. I just wanted to see you once so that I could stop imagining your face every night and wondering if you were okay. I stared at her for a long time, and then, for the first time in all of this, I felt something. Unexpected pity. Not for her betrayal, not for what she lost, but for the way she had to live with what she did every day, with no one to blame but herself. She asked me if I was happy. I said I wasn't sure yet, but I was peaceful. She smiled then, small but real. You always deserved peace. We talked for an hour about nothing and everything. About how her life fell apart after I left, how the man she had chosen didn't stay long after I disappeared, how her friends stopped calling, how silence filled every room in our old house, how she stared at my side of the bed and wondered if I hated her enough to stay gone forever. And when she finished, she looked at me with tears held back by pure willpower. I just needed you to know I never stopped loving you. Even when I lost you, especially then, I didn't say it back. I couldn't. Because love doesn't mean you forget what someone did when they had a choice, and she made hers. But I nodded, and that was enough. When we walked out, she touched my arm, just for a second. No grip, no plea, just contact. And then we went in. Separate directions. No promises, no plans. Just closure that neither of us expected. And as I drove back to Ward, the town that had become my new home, I realized something that stayed with me the entire way. Some stories don't need happy endings. They just need endings. After that meeting, something strange started happening. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like a survivor standing tall after betrayal either. What I felt was more difficult to explain. Like I was staring at the ghost of the person I used to be and realizing how close I came. To disappearing entirely? I don't mean physically. I mean emotionally. Identity. Self. There's a kind of damage that doesn't look dramatic. It's not loud or theatrical. It's the slow, quiet kind. The kind that happens when every small disappointment gets swept under the rug until one day the floor collapses. I'd spent years sacrificing little pieces of myself for the sake of keeping our marriage stable, thinking if I'd just tried a little harder, loved her a little louder, forgave her a little quicker, maybe she'd come back to me. But she never really left, did she? She was right there, physically present, emotionally vacant. And I was still feeding an empty seat. Now, months later, I was beginning to understand that the life I mourned wasn't even real anymore. The version of us I kept holding on to, the version I was grieving, had probably died long before I ever walked out that door. I had just refused to bury it. That realization didn't come in a flash of inspiration. It came in small, subtle moments. Like folding laundry and realizing none of it smells like her anymore. Or walking past a bakery and remembering how she hated the smell of cinnamon, but it didn't bother me now. Or waking up one morning and noticing that I didn't dream about her the night before and not feeling guilty about that. It was like peeling off layers I didn't know I had. Some of them were scar tissue. Some were habits that no longer served me. Some were regrets I had been holding too close to my chest. For a while, I thought about calling her again, not to rekindle anything, just to ask her one final question that still lingered in the back of my mind. Did you ever think I'd stay gone? But every time I reached for the phone, I stopped, because I already knew the answer. She never believed I'd leave. She never expected me to disappear so completely, without a trace, without a shout, without one last scene. That's why it worked. Because it wasn't a performance. It was peace. Real peace doesn't come with fireworks or loud declarations. It arrives like quiet footsteps at the edge of your life. It doesn't demand anything from you. It waits. And the moment you decide to let go of everything you can't control, the resentment, the fantasy, the need for closure, that's when it enters. I had stopped checking social media long ago, but one night, out of sheer curiosity, I searched her name. She looked different, not in a bad way, just different. She was posting less, no photos with new people, no bold captions pretending everything was perfect. Just the occasional quote or memory, usually vague and reflective. Then I saw it, a photo of a beach. A caption beneath it said, "There are some things you never get back, but there's peace in knowing you had them once." That was the last time I searched her name. I don't know where she is now or who she's become. And to be honest, I don't think I need to know, because I'm not the man she left behind anymore. I get up early, I drink coffee slowly. I fix boats. That will never be mine. I watch the horizon every evening like it's telling me a secret. I talk less but feel more. Some days I even laugh. Not at anything in particular, but just because I made it through a version of myself that I didn't think would survive. Sometimes people think moving on means finding someone new, filling the gap, rewriting the story. But sometimes moving on is quieter. It's healing without applause. It's learning to sit with your own company and finally feeling safe there. Don't miss her the way I used to. I missed the version of me that believed love alone was enough. That version of me was naive, but beautifully so, and I'm proud of him. He tried. He gave his best. But I'm also proud of the man who let go, because he saved my life. You know, nobody really prepares you for what happens after the healing. Everyone talks about the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak. Everyone knows what it's like to fall apart. But no one tells you what it's like to stand up one day and realize the pain isn't the loudest thing in the room anymore. That the grief didn't vanish, it just found a place in the corner and quietly sat down. For a long time, I thought the end of our marriage was the end of my story. But I was wrong. It was the middle, the hard, gritty middle that shaped everything else. I hadn't seen her since that coffee shop meeting. Months passed, seasons changed, people came and went, but I stayed where I was. In that coastal town, living a life small enough to hold in my hands, but big enough to fill the space she left behind. And then something I never expected happened. Life started asking more from me again. One afternoon, a woman named Eliza showed up at the marina. She wasn't from town. Her car had broken down, and she needed help getting her father's small sailboat prepped to sell. She didn't know how to tie a knot, check the lines, or steer into the dock without bumping the side. I offered to help. It was supposed to be a one-day favor. It turned into a week, then 2. She asked questions, not the kind that pry, but the kind that make you feel like your words might matter again. She noticed details, laughed at things no one else did, and she didn't look at me like someone waiting for an answer. She just looked present, still aware. I didn't fall in love. Let me be clear. This wasn't about rushing into something new to cover the wounds of the past. It was slower than that, gentler, like waking up one morning and realizing the sky had been blue for a while, and you were just too focused on your scars to look up. We started having coffee after work, sometimes on the dock, sometimes at a quiet cafe where no one asked questions. She never pressed about my past. I never asked about hers. But we both carried something, the weight of stories we weren't quite ready to share, but no longer needed to hide. She told me once that she didn't believe in moving on. I think we move around pain, she said, like it's a fire in the middle of the room. Some people sit and stare at it forever, some circle it, some walk away from it, but nobody ever really forgets it was there. That stayed with me. One evening, we stood at the edge of the dock, watching a slow rain ripple across the water. She reached for my hand, just a quiet gesture, no words. I let her. Not because I wanted to forget my past, but because I finally understood something that had taken me nearly a year to accept. Closure isn't a door that shuts. It's a window you open when the air gets too heavy. I never told her everything. I didn't need to. She saw it in the way I sometimes stared too long at nothing, or the way I held silence like a fragile thing. She didn't try to fill it. She just stood beside it. And slowly, I began to realize something I never expected. I wasn't waiting to be whole again, because I already was. Not in a triumphant, victorious way. Not in some dramatic I survived and now I thrive kind of arc, but in a quiet, grounded way. I was whole because I had accepted the fractures. I had learned to live with them, to carry them without letting them drag behind me. And in that acceptance, I discovered peace wasn't a destination. It was a choice I made every day. In the way I got out of bed, in the way I poured my coffee, in the way I let someone hold my hand without expecting them to save me. That was the life I built after the betrayal. A life that grew not because I found someone new, but because I finally found myself. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't looking back anymore. There's something you don't expect. To feel at the end of a story like this, gratitude. Not for the pain, not for the betrayal, not even for the lessons, if I'm being honest. But for the stillness that comes when you finally stop asking the wrong questions. For months, maybe longer, I'd kept wondering why she did it, how she could have done it, when it started, what I had missed. But those were questions designed to keep me chained to something I had already walked away from. They weren't answers I needed. They were echoes, and they belonged to a man I no longer was. Now, my questions were different. What does peace look like today? How do I give more than I take? Can I live a life that feels like mine again, without apology? And slowly I realized I already was. I didn't go back to her. I never planned to. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no second attempt at something that had run its course, but I did forgive her, not with words and not for her sake. I forgave her so that I could let go of the version of myself that was still carrying her. Choices like they were my burden. And in that letting go, I found room for something new. Eliza didn't fix me. It's not how real people work. But she met me where I was whole, but a little weathered. She didn't ask me to be anyone else. She never compared what we had to anything I lost. She just showed up on quiet mornings, on rainy nights, on days when I laughed, and days when I didn't. She stood beside the man I had become, not the man I had been. We kept things simple. Long walks, shared meals. Sunday afternoons spent reading or listening to the world go quiet. There was no pressure to define what it was between us, and maybe that's why it worked. It wasn't about filling space. It was about honoring it. One morning not long ago, she handed me a small box. It wasn't a ring. It was a compass, a real one, brass, weathered, slightly scratched on the lid. Inside, a note in her handwriting. You found your own way out. Now trust yourself to find your way forward. Carry the compass with me, not because I need it to navigate, but because it reminds me that I'm no longer lost, that I've walked through fire, through silence, through a version of life that nearly undid me, and I came out quieter, steadier, stronger. I still think of my past sometimes, but not with pain, just with perspective. Because if that version of life hadn't ended, I never would have built the one I have now, a life filled with calm mornings, with deep laughter, with someone who listens, and with a man I'm proud to be, not because he survived betrayal, but because he chose peace, over and over again, even when it would have been easier to stay angry. So no, this story didn't end with revenge or closure wrapped in a perfect bow.